Since its official presentation in 1986, hydroplate theory has perplexed evolutionist scientists. So much so that they've been completely silent on it. Walter Brown's model for the global flood thoroughly explains nearly every physical feature on Earth, including several that evolutionism can't. The concept is very simple. In the beginning, God created the earth, and miles beneath the surface was a vast cavern full of water which stretched completely around the subterranean world and was under intense pressure from the surface, which was comprised of a giant granite plate which also encircled the globe, trapping the water beneath it. Eventually, this granite plate developed a fissure which quickly spread around the world and allowed the trapped superheated water to escape, eventually raining down on the surface, creating a worldwide deluge which covered the planet and eventually receded, leaving behind the continents and the vast oceans between them. This theory may seem unorthodox, but it actually requires very few assumptions and requires no miracles. So why are the scientists completely silent about it? I had to investigate. The concept of hydroplates had its inception at least as far back as the 19th century. In 1840, John Murray published Truth of Revelation, which presented multiple lines of evidence for creationism. Among these was the idea that the continents were plates resting upon a giant globe of water. This was in keeping with the King James translation of Genesis, wherein the land rose from the waters of the deep. For obvious reasons, this model was never seriously entertained by the scientific consensus, but the concept of continents being plates was already proposed in several other models, not just for the Noachian flood. Walter Brown, a retired military engineer, developed an early incarnation of his own flood model and presented his paper, The Fountains of the Deep, at the first International Conference on Creationism in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in August of 1986. That same year, Brown founded the Center for Scientific Creation, and after a few refinements, Brown self-published his theory through his company in 1995 as part of his comprehensive, In the Beginning, Compelling Evidence for Creation and the Flood. Now in its 8th edition and awaiting a 9th, the book is split into 3 sections. The first section deals with various challenges to evolutionary theory, while the third section deals with frequently asked questions about assertions presented by evolution, abiogenesis, and Big Bang cosmology. I have already addressed many of these arguments in earlier episodes and will address many others in future episodes. Hydroplate theory is presented in the second section, titled Fountains of the Great Deep. In Brown's scenario, the continental plates, comprised mostly of granite, were once just a single uniformly thick layer of granite encircling the entire planet. In earlier incarnations of the theory, Brown estimated the granite plates to be around 10 miles thick. However, he has subsequently revised this figure on his website to anywhere between 20 and 60 miles. I would expect the upcoming 9th edition to reflect this as well. Beneath these granite plates would have been a vast underground cavern of water containing roughly half of the water currently in our oceans today and also encircling the planet. Beneath this vast cavern of water was a layer of basalt encircling the globe to a depth of up to 100 miles. Below this basalt is a heated yet solid mantle leading downward into a liquid outer core and a solid inner core. The granite layer was held fast to the basalt layer by millions of pillar-like structures where the surface warped downward. Due to this warping, the surface at the time had some relief, including very small mountains and shallow depressions allowing for shallow seas, but nothing as dramatic as the planet's modern-day topography. Although Brown claims that no miracles are required, there is no current explanation for how water could have ever become trapped between discrete layers of granite and basalt. Brown correctly notes that granite has never been replicated in a lab. The distinguishing characteristic of all granites is their granular appearance. This is the result of materials like quartz and feldspar within magma forming crystals over the course of cooling. Geologists have known for centuries how to grow crystals in the lab, and in fact, you can purchase lab-grown crystals including quartz and feldspar online at any gem show or even at your local jeweler. If you're so inclined, you can also purchase science kits that allow you to grow your own at home. The process of growing crystals is a relatively simple one. Place a small sample of a crystal in an aqueous solution of dissolved crystalline materials, then simply wait, and you'll see that the dissolved crystals in the the aqueous solution have accumulated and grown in a crystalline pattern. You can do a faster version of this process using Epsom salts, which dissolve and accumulate rather rapidly. Within hours, you will have a noticeably larger crystal, or even several crystals. The same applies to dissolved crystals like quartz or feldspar, with the notable exception that they require much higher temperatures like that of magma to dissolve. The magma in the mantle is often described as solid, but this is only half correct. The temperatures in the mantle are hot enough to make solid rock pliable. In this state, it is referred to as a solid, but it also has a characteristic known as visco-elasticity. In this state, crystalline material does flow throughout the rock, but nowhere near as rapidly as in water. For this reason, the observed process of crystallization requires significantly longer periods of time. If magma cools quickly, the crystals don't have time to form, and the result is a rock like diorite with the same chemical composition as granite, but with a more diffused concentration. Due to the immense heat, when magma is collected in the field, it is immediately cooled in water, impeding the crystallization process. Regardless, due to the size of crystals in granites or diorite, geologists can determine when and where in the Earth's surface the rock initially formed. According to the theory, the water trapped between the granite and basalt layers was being circulated by a process known as tidal pumping due to the moon's gravity and orbit around the planet. This motion, as well as centrifugal force due to the Earth's rotation and the minor gravitational effects of the sun, caused the planet to slightly bulge along its equator, increasing friction in the waters, resulting in their significant increase in temperature over time. Being trapped between the two rock layers, the increase in water temperature led to an increase in pressure. This continued until the temperature was so hot and the pressure was so high that the water became supercritical. A fluid is supercritical when it exists in a superheated and superpressurized state where it is too hot to remain a liquid and yet too pressurized to remain a gas. At this point, the two states of matter are indistinguishable. The concept of tidal pumping in and of itself makes some sense. I won't bother to contest the temperatures or pressures involved, but there are some issues with the overall scenario. As Brown points out, when pressures build beneath, the granite plate would be stretched and would become thinner. A very similar concept can be observed by stretching a rubber band. As it becomes more and more stretched, the thinner it becomes. As the pillar-like structures are part of the granite plate, they should be stretched and become thinner too, pulling away from the basalt layer. Compounding this is the elongation of the Earth's diameter at the equator due to the Earth's rotations. The difference is nearly 20 miles. This also stretches the pillar-like structures, and since the majority of the plate is not attached to the planet, there is far less resistance keeping it attached. This stretches the plate and the pillar-like structures ever further. In this model, Brown significantly overestimates the elasticity of granite. Disregarding this, as the tidal pumping of supercritical water continued, the pillar-like structures began to weaken until at least one pillar crumbled and a fissure opened up in the granite, going downward into the water beneath. A modern example of this used to support hydroplate theory is the surface of Europa, a moon around Jupiter. On January 6, 2014, and again in February of 2016, NASA witnessed what appeared to be plumes of water erupting from the surface of Europa. Similar phenomena have been observed on Saturn's moons as well. These eruptions may seem like an analog for hydroplate theory, but they are in fact plumes of water bursting through frozen water, not plates of granite. Additionally, the plumes themselves are singular, individual ice volcanoes resulting from immense forces caused by being tidally locked with Jupiter. This example fails as an analog for the hydroplate model. But assuming the initial condition of the granite plate presented by hydroplate theory is correct, it would seem inevitable that a rupture would occur. Many creationist organizations such as Answers in Genesis, Creation Ministries International, and the Creation Research Society have asserted that this scenario presents a ticking time bomb, implying that the destruction of the world was inevitable from the beginning, which further implies that God intended to destroy the world from the beginning. This really has no bearing on the theory, but it may be notable that Brown rejects these assertions out of hand. Inevitable or not, the theory asserts that a rupture did occur. Brown points out that the mid-oceanic ridges form one long continuous chain around the world which intersects in the Indian Ocean. Measuring out the distance, he has deduced that this rupture would have begun with a fissure somewhere near the Bering Strait off the coast of Alaska, and then took the path of least resistance around the world and completely encircling it within 2 hours. This is puzzling considering that, as shown earlier, the greatest amount amount of force on the worldwide granite plate would have been at the equator. Additionally, the path of least resistance in this scenario would necessarily be where the inertia and pressure to rupture would be greatest, which would be along the equator. There is no explanation for why the rupture would have followed such a convoluted path. The pathway notwithstanding, this crack allowed the trapped supercritical water to escape in a massive fountain following behind the fissure breach. Being supercritical, the water would be expelled at an extreme velocity upward. The immediate criticism is that this heat should transfer into the atmosphere, thereby scalding the planet. In his video presentation available on Brown's site and YouTube, Brian Nichol demonstrates that air is a particularly poor conductor of heat by showing this picture of his hands merely inches from a Bunsen burner flame. What neither Brown nor Nichol account for is the transfer of heat through water and steam. When superheated water is expelled, it begins a rapid expansion. This can be observed when a geyser erupts. Heat may not transfer well through air, but it certainly does transfer well through steam, and wind does a particularly good job of spreading steam around. Usually, wind is due to a temperature differential of only a few degrees. The scenario Hydroplate Theory suggests is a differential of up to 1,000 degrees. Combine this with the fact that the water is still depressurizing, and we easily have a massive expansion of superheated steam and air known as a blast wave. Hydroplate Theory simply can't explain this away. As this giant crack opened up, the stretched plates were suddenly free to snap back into place. Considering that the differential of the diameter from the poles to the equator is roughly 20 miles, we can also determine the total amount of distance these plates would snap back. We can determine that the plates at the equator snapped back from a total diameter of roughly 12,430 miles to roughly 12,400 miles. This means the cracks opened up a combined distance of roughly 30 miles, or more accurately, 15 miles in the Atlantic and 15 miles in the Pacific. At this point, the fountain rifts would be 15 miles by a maximum of 60 miles. This would allow for even more superheated water to be released into the atmosphere. But it gets even worse. According to Hydroplate Theory, this torrent sent water and crustal material careening into the stratosphere, where it would lose heat into the vacuum of space. The problem with this claim is that 2 of the 3 methods of heat transfer do not exist in space. On Earth, heat transfers through conduction, convection, and radiation. Both convection and conduction require transfer through direct contact. In space, there is nothing to conduct heat from the water and nothing for heat to convect into. All that remains is radiation, the weakest of the 3 methods. Further, Brian Nichol asserts in his video that the temperature in space is near absolute zero, implying that heat radiates freely in that environment. While the cosmic background temperature at negative 455 degrees Fahrenheit is just less than 5 degrees warmer than absolute zero, the temperatures in space vary wildly to over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, especially within Earth's proximity to the Sun. Hydroplate theory does not account for this. Regardless of this, Brown specifically points out that as the oceans later filled due to rain, the fountains of the deep continued to expel water even after the water level had risen to the point to where the fountains no longer erupted into the atmosphere. This means that the fountains were now ejecting superheated water directly into the ocean and heating it up. Whether or not this would be enough to make the oceans boil is debatable, but the unavoidable conclusion is that it would significantly change the temperature and the depths of the world's oceans. Since nearly all marine organisms have specific tolerances for temperature and depth, these significant changes in temperature and depth would be fatal, and the oceans should have been nearly devoid of any plant or animal life. Hydroplate theory does not take this into account. Regardless of the temperatures involved, these fountains of the deep, like geysers today, would also eject material from the granite and basalt plates along with supercritical water. This served to trim the edges of the plates back even further, but it also sent continental debris into space. Brown asserts that some of this debris struck the moon, resulting in its cratered surface. While this scenario is colorful, there are some problems. The first is that if it were true, we should expect to see far more craters on the near side than the far side. Photos from both manned and unmanned NASA missions show quite clearly that this is not the case. Brown has replied to this by claiming that craters on the far side are the result of debris falling back to the moon after colliding with it, and went as far as to say that the craters on the near side confirm his theory, as they are far larger. As it happens, the largest crater on the moon is the Aitken Basin on the far side. More importantly, if the theory were true, we should also expect to find granite from Earth on the surface of the moon. As I've already mentioned, both quartz and feldspar are very common in Earth's granites, but are almost never found in lunar granites, and when they are found, are only found in diffused trace amounts. Additionally, silicates such as coesite and stishovite are also abundant in Earth granites, but have never been observed in any lunar granites. In fact, lunar granites aren't even true granites. So despite Brown's assertions, at present there is no indication of any sort of deluge of Earth material on the Moon whatsoever. Brown further asserts that debris from Earth that didn't strike the Moon or fall back to Earth continued on its way, becoming all meteoroids, asteroids, comets, and Trans-Neptunian objects. According to Brian Nichol, this is the reason why Brown has revised his theory to propose that the plates were up to 60 miles thick instead of just 10. He points out that the entirety of all objects in the asteroid belt combined are equivalent to 0.048% of Earth's total mass. Trans-Neptunian objects, including the Kuiper belt and scattered disk, however, have a combined mass equal to between 10 and 25% of Earth's mass. Keeping in mind that the continental plates account for only 0.374% of Earth's total mass today, when adding the mass of just the Trans-Neptunian objects, the theory necessarily implies that the current plates are less than 5% of the mass of the Earth's initial granite surface. Brown may be well advised to revise his theory further to propose an even thicker initial granite plate, but already the possibility of human or any other life surviving 95% of all surface material being ejected into space is conclusively remote. Further complicating matters is the composition of meteors and asteroids. Although most meteors, asteroids, and comets are composed of metals and silicates that are found on Earth, none of them have been found to contain granite. Many of them do contain rocks similar to igneous rocks, but none of them have been found to contain basalt. They obviously did not come from Earth's crust. Comets, on the other hand, contain large amounts of water, enough that they were once hypothesized to be the source of the water in Earth's oceans. As Brown correctly points out, comets contain an element called deuterium, which is a heavier yet stable form of hydrogen. The nucleus of a normal hydrogen atom only contains one proton. The nucleus of a deuterium atom is a proton and a neutron. The waters of Earth contain about 0.02% deuterium, while comets contain between 0.2 and 0.5%, which is 10 to 25 times that amount. Barring an as yet unknown natural method of removing a neutron from the nucleus, it is highly unlikely that comets are the source of Earth's oceans. Conversely, this also means that Earth is unlikely to be the source of those comets. Brown, however, claims that hydroplate theory explains this with the flutter of the granite plates. According to Brown, the sudden loss of pressure near the rift caused the walls on both sides to slam down, creating a water hammer cutting off the flow of supercritical water. At this time, the remaining pillars began to fail and the plates came crushing down, causing the water hammers to open, resulting in subsequent ejections of superheated water and surface materials. During the flooding, the granite plates on the surface began fluttering up and down, creating electrical voltage via the piezoelectric effect. The piezoelectric effect is a phenomenon which occurs when electricity accumulates in crystals, certain ceramics, and biological matter such as bone, DNA, and various proteins under excessive mechanical stress. According to Brown's theory, this excess of electrical current manifested extraordinarily strong magnetic forces. As the plates continued to flutter, an electrical charge built up over the course of weeks. Combined with intermittent increases and decreases in pressure, this forced atomic nuclei to fuse, creating deuterium and all of the heavier radioactive elements which Brown says cannot be created by stars. The problem here is that if half of Earth's oceans were once under hydroplates, the concentration of deuterium in the modern oceans should be between 5 and 12 times the amount we actually see. Hydroplate theory does not adequately account for this. Regardless of this discrepancy, and after months of flooding, the hydroplate model eventually enters the continental drift phase. With the granite plates now receded several miles due to material ejected, the basalt layer and mantle beneath the widened rift was relieved of the plate's pressure. This allowed the pressures below to push up on the basalt layer, creating mid-ocean ridges within the world-encircling gap between the plates. The plates, being pushed up by this upheaval and lubricated by water, began sliding away from the ridges. As the plates gained momentum, they met with resistance, which caused compression and buckling that pushed up mountains and created distortions. This seems like a plausible scenario until you consider that most of these granite plates were flanked on either side by these uprisings. There would have been nowhere for them to slide, and no way for any momentum to build up before experiencing resistance. Brown Brown asks us to accept the assertion that plates with no mechanism for gaining momentum slid not just down the mountain slopes, but several hundred miles away across what is essentially a flat seafloor while compressing enough to create mountains like the Himalayas. The hydroplate model simply doesn't make sense here. After roughly 1 day of continental drift, the plates would have more or less settled in their current positions as the world entered a recovery phase which continues today, over 4,000 years later. This was just an overview of the mechanisms behind the hydroplate model. Savvy viewers who have actually read Brown's theory will notice that there are multiple explanations it gives for modern phenomena, which I haven't even addressed here. I will be addressing the more consequential claims in future episodes. I also didn't address features I've already investigated. The hydroplate theory is purported to be a scientific theory requiring no miracles whatsoever. Whether or not the mechanisms behind the theory are natural, and whether or not natural phenomena are thoroughly explained, hydroplate theory doesn't hold up to scrutiny. It cannot account for the particular path taken by the granite rift. It can't explain how any life could survive the excessive temperatures and massive destruction the model would wreak upon the planet. Evidence for its validity cannot be found on the moon nor any of the objects in space that it claims originated on Earth. Deuterium and heavy elements do not support the theory, nor does any application of the continental drift phase. The scenarios it requires are borderline fantastical, and several claims it makes just do not follow from the evidence. As of this video's upload date, hydroplate theory at best requires significant revision to be a viable model for a worldwide flood in Earth's geologically recent past. Perhaps when the 9th edition is published, we will see those revisions and we can test it here again. Until then, despite or rather because of its flaws, hydroplate theory is another example of how creationism taught me real science. If there's a creationist argument you think I should investigate, please comment below. It may become the basis for a future episode. In the meantime, subscribe and make sure you don't miss it.